Hello and welcome to We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP Government and Politics program in collaboration with Nauset's video production class. During the next 30 minutes, our panel, made up of 10th, 11th, and 12th grade Nauset students, will discuss the issue of capital punishment, more specifically, whether or not the federal death penalty constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. I am your guest host, Jacob Hirschberger, a senior here at Nauset and a veteran of the AP Government class. Just for the record, opinions expressed here belong to the panelists and are not the views of Nauset Regional High School or the Nauset Regional School District. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a special email address for our panel today. Please feel free to email us your thoughts and suggestions about today's topic so we can continue our discussion in our government classroom. Now let's meet our panel. On the pro-death penalty side, we have Cole, Caitlin, and Vanessa. And on the against death penalty side, we have Siri, Dylan, and Claire. Dylan, I believe you're going to begin.
Hi. I'm against the death penalty because it's economically infeasible, it doesn't deter crime, it's racially biased, and frankly, it's inhumane. We live in a civilized society. We shouldn't kill our prisoners.
Okay, well, I think we're, for the death penalty because the people who commit crimes that would instill the death penalty, they've committed serious crimes. A lot of them have ended lives, and they've affected communities and even the entire country. And a lot of people can argue that, using supermax prisons where criminals are kept for life in prison situations, they're expensive to operate, and you could argue that it's inhumane to keep somebody in a prison for their whole life, just kind of waiting for them to die. So that's why we're for the death penalty.
So it's more inhumane to keep people alive than it is to kill them?
No, but if you think about living in complete isolation from the time you're 20 or 30 to the time you die, which is average around 70, that's a long time to just keep somebody alive, and in such confinement.
But isn't if somebody is non-violent, they'll move you back into community prison, less security?
And it also killing them basically deteriorates the whole entire. Prisoners need to readjust to society so that they can be beneficial, and killing them would basically make that it couldn't happen because they need to have the prison system so that they can learn how to function on their own and learn how to be productive members of society and to go back out and to make a better world.
Well, these people have clearly committed a serious crime, and sometimes they may not be able to rehabilitate themselves to be back in society.
Well, that's why we have life in prison without parole.
And that's still more humane than actually killing them. The only countries that kill their prisoners are Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China. Not even Russia kills their prisoners. Uses the death penalty. So, we, in a way, are almost worse than Russia by using the death penalty.
I don't believe that statistic is, compatible to the United States, our federal law system. I just don't believe that we're compatible to Russia just because we, have a federal death penalty.
It's just not humane in my opinion.
Well, it's because Putin doesn't even believe in a death penalty. We do. In parts of this country, we do. That's saying something. That is saying something about our country.
And countries like Saudi Arabia, China, they have hardly any rights to their people. So, it's putting us on a level with those countries.
Well, the people who are committing these crimes, our criminal law system is different than other countries. If you look at those countries, they have high rates of murder and stuff, and they might think that killing people is the answer to it, but we also, there are people in this country who commit serious crimes, and even from other countries that come into our country and do horrible things terrorists and that sort of foreign threat, and that's the United States has always had it, and it's just our solution to serious crime in some cases.
But what is it sending? I'm sorry to cut you off.
So are you saying that the death penalty is a deterrent to violent crime?
No, but we use it in cases for example, the Boston Marathon bombing, like he affected an entire city and he killed many people and he injured a lot of people. And, you know, if you think about that, it could give people closure that he won't ever be a threat to our country again because, like, he's sentenced to death.
You guys talked about countries a lot, and something that makes our country unique is our Constitution. And an amendment in that Constitution is the amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. You guys would obviously argue that the death penalty is cruel and unusual. You guys would argue against that. I want to hear your opinions on why you think it is, why you think it isn't, and how it's applied here.
Okay, well, I have some statistics on the drugs being used for lethal injections. And because of the high price of these drugs, a lot of them have been in, like, manufactured in non-FDA approved pharmacy companies. And there is one case in 2012 where one of these companies was the source of an outbreak of fungal meningitis. That was, like, bad sickness, very dangerous. And by having these drugs that they use in lethal injections, it can cause, like, these terrible, painful deaths that are just inhumane.
Well, from the research that I did, most states that had the death penalty would use lethal injection, and they say that in pretty much every case it's a painless and quick death. There might be cases where maybe it was ineffective or it was a faulty dose, but from all the research that I did, it should be a painless, quick death. So.
Well, from 1890 to 2010, there were about 8,776 executions, and 276 of them went wrong in some way. For example, Clayton D. Lockett in 2014, he was given an experimental lethal injection, which caused him to experience serious pain for 40 minutes while he was still conscious. The witnesses weren't even allowed to see what happened to him after a while because they were forced out of the room. He was awake and he could feel the whole thing, which is pretty much inarguably cruel and unusual. For another example, there's, in 1983, Jimmy Lee Gray, who was put into a gas chamber by a drunk executioner and died gasping for air as he banged his head against a steel pole. That's pretty much inarguably cruel and unusual, and any system that allows this is just un-American, frankly.
Well, I agree.
Go
ahead.
That was 1983. That isn't 2016.
Yes, but in Texas, alone in this year, there have been 7 people put to death. That is 7 people in a whole entire state. The year's not even over yet.
And they're all at risk for having a botched execution like that one.
Well, yeah, but those were just like a few instances that, yes, something did go wrong, like you said, the drunk executioner, and, you know, we could always instill policies and stuff that would make it more, like, it'd just be safer and more efficient, and there'd just be a greater guarantee that the executions would go smoothly and that we wouldn't have problems like that.
But the reason we haven't is because it's so expensive to, like, make policies about making sure that it's safe. And you have some numbers for that, right? You want to?
Yeah, the death penalty is already incredibly expensive. For example, in Kansas, it's $400,000 per case compared to $100,000 per case where the death penalty wasn't sought. That's 4 times as much for life in prison without parole. In Maryland, it costs $3 million a case. In Texas, $2.3 million, which is about 3 times as much as imprisoning somebody in a single cell with the highest security for 40 years. It's just a waste of money.
But if you think about operating supermax prisons, like I did research on one from Illinois, TAM Supermax Prison, it's approximately $62,000 a year per inmate. And then if you think about having 200 or more in that single prison, not only is it expensive, but it's a burden to the taxpayers. It's not just like coming out of nowhere. So.
Well, if you want to talk about burden to the taxpayers in California, since 1978, they've spent $4 billion on executing people. That's a lot of money.
You guys are bringing up cost a lot. And cost is a factor here, but I want to get the opinion from you guys. Do you think that the cost outweighs some of the other effects of the penalty? So it may be expensive, but is there a greater good to be served? Is that something you would say?
Yeah, of course. If there's a murder on the streets, I don't know, rehabilitated, I don't really think you can come back from being a murderer to being a citizen on the street.
What if you're falsely accused? Because in Texas, in 1983, Carlos de Luna, this is a very famous case, was falsely accused of murdering a gas station attendant, and it was actually Carlos Hernandez who did it. but they used it based off of race. They thought, oh, he looks sketchy. Carlos Hernandez had a knife right near the gas station, but they thought it was Carlos de Luna, and he was falsely accused and he was killed. How do you explain that? How do you explain these false accusations that go around all in different cases, and they are executed, and they aren't even they screwed up on how they got their DNA. The police screwed up on how they got the DNA, how they questioned the witnesses. They didn't even follow up with Carlos de Luna when he said it wasn't me. They didn't. They did not do any of that, and they put an innocent man to death. How do you explain that? How?
There have been advancements in the DNA, like looking for the DNA, and that's taken a lot of innocent people off of death row. And however, this only strengthens the position that the truly guilty of heinous crimes sentenced to death are the criminals that deserve this death.
Also, like, if you think about, I've a couple cases that I researched, like Godfrey versus Georgia, the people who were accused of, murder or serious crime and were possibly going to be given the death penalty, they have a lot of ways to appeal to higher courts, and a lot of them go to the Supreme Court. And, you just have to trust that the highest court in the land would make a conscious decision whether they think this person is innocent or not. And obviously, like, there could be mistakes in the DNA testing or the forensics of the case, but they always have a chance to go to a higher court and see, do I really think that this person deserves death or not?
But the problem is that in Texas and in states like in states, the rate that a black person gets sent to death is 3 times more likely than a white person. So if we have that also, the race issue, human lives, how do you explain that too? How do you explain this race issue that happens with this problem?
There have been 20 cases with a white defendant that killed a black man that has resulted in an execution, whereas for the opposite, a black man killing a white man, there have been 282 cases, which, when you take into account how many more white people than there are than black people, that's just inexcusable, besides the fact that we all have our own inherent biases that it takes a long time to get rid of. Juries don't have the time or resources to go through the kind of training to get rid of those kinds of biases. It's unfair, inarguably unfair.
I believe that that's a fault in our justice system, not a fault in the death penalty. As well as your case about Carlos from the Texas gas station about having a knife. I don't believe that that's a fault of the death penalty. I believe that's the fault of the justice system.
But in any system with the death penalty, like, if the death penalty is there, is an option, then it's even more dangerous to have a fault if the death penalty is an option.
Because you're putting somebody's life at risk. You are putting him to death when he does not deserve to be at death. You cannot go back and bring him back to life. But if you put him in jail, it would be a very different story, because then they could retry him. You cannot retry somebody when they are dead.
Well, most death penalty cases, like, people don't get executed for, like, a long time. They sit on death row for years.
16 and a half.
Wasting tax money.
Yeah, but you can still go back. And, like, it's not like they're getting killed, like, the second their case ends. So they could still have another chance to, like, go back and argue it.
It is a very lengthy appeals process, which can also be sort of inherently unjust to the families of the victim, because they have to be notified for every appeal, for everything. And, like, people could sit on death row for, like, 20 years. They'll keep getting dragged back into the incident that they're just trying to move on from. There's a healthy way, and continuing to revisit it isn't healthy to move on from a death.
But if they committed a crime, they have to understand that what they did was wrong, and that's part of the reason why we have the death penalty to begin with. It's
They never get to
help
understand.
criminals understand that they are doing something serious.
They can't understand if they're dead.
And
Well,
also,
no, but while they're sitting on death row, you're saying they're bringing it back up?
No,
Like,
what he's trying to say is the families of the victims, and every time the case is appealed, the families of the victims are reminded of just, like, their brother or their father being murdered, and it's tragic if they're trying to move on. They're constantly reminded of this terrible thing that happened to them.
Well, that's why death penalty gives some of them closure. Like, in the Boston Marathon bombings, a lot of people, after the death penalty was the final decision, they said, like, we don't want to put somebody to death, but it gives us closure that he's no longer a threat and that the
15%
victims.
of the people living in Boston didn't want the death penalty for that case.
And the death penalty is illegal in Massachusetts, where it took place.
Just one moment for a quick update. You are watching We the Students, a public affairs political discussion of AP government students at Nauset Regional High School. At the bottom of your screen is a special email address for our panel. Please feel free to email us your thoughts and suggestions about today's topic so we continue this discussion in our government class. I want to get back to the larger issue here of the moral and constitutionality of this debate. There's a lot of semantics, here and there, but truly it comes down to the constitutionality of this law. Why specifically do you both think it is constitutional or it is unconstitutional? Either you can start. Jerry?
I don't know if I have a good, I wanted to argue it philosophically, was that, before I argue constitutionally, arguing philosophically is that by using the death penalty, it's saying that the life of one is worth less than the life of everybody else, which sounds good in theory, but like, if it was your mother, your brother, your best friend, you can still see the good in this person, even if they're going to be like punished so terribly. And what if it was your best friend and you know that they're good and they have good in them and they have potential, and if they just went to prison and spent part of their life there and eventually they're let out, went back into society, then you could have them back and they would have learned their lesson.
I believe that once you murder someone, there's no going back. Well, murder is just one of the cases. Treason, putting our country in risk. I just don't believe that once you do something of that bad of a crime, you can just go back onto the streets and enjoy the rest of your life with your family. Like, I just don't believe once you take a life, you don't.
These crimes
Get
they've
back on the streets.
committed are heinous, which is why they are being put to death.
So they can spend the rest of their life in prison with no chance of parole.
And I also come with the stance of an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Because it's this idea that if we punish somebody because they kill somebody, we aren't making any progress. Yes, we're taking them away from society and they're dead, but we're not teaching the greater good. Like, we're teaching people that, oh, if you commit a crime, you'll just be murdered, or you'll just die. It's not like you have to spend your life in prison suffering, because there is this ideal that, like, if you are in prison, it's not a cakewalk.
And you could argue that being in prison is a worse punishment than being executed, because of
That's what I'm thinking. Like, if I wouldn't want to spend the rest of my life in prison, like, that's inhumane. Just locking someone up in prison for the rest of their life with no parole, no chance of getting out. Like,
yeah, but if you're saying these crimes that they're committing are so heinous and terrible, then wouldn't you want them to have a worse punishment by being sent to prison?
I don't believe in. That's sort of cruel and unusual to me. Just punishing someone because you would like to punish them.
I think
because
it's a
they
little cruel and unusual to have a date on the calendar that you know you're never going to live past.
But life in prison is basically just telling them that they're going to live the rest of their life out in complete solitude.
Not complete solitude. There are other prisoners.
Yeah, they do programs
Dangerous
so
ones.
that if you behave in prison, then they will try and integrate you back into life. It's not, I just don't understand how killing somebody and then saying, "Oh, we're just going to end your life. Like, you're not going to have to live with this for the rest of your life."
But by saying that, you almost degrade the person who was murdered. So you're kind of saying
no, because they have to live out their life knowing what they did. They have to live, and they have to live that out. They have to live with themselves knowing that they did this crime in jail. They have to, it's not just you're dead, okay, like, you got your punishment, now you're free. Because when you kill somebody, the thing is that what I'm trying to make the point is that I feel that when you are in jail, you have time to think about what you've done, how you got here, how you got there. And you are going to think about, do you have anything, do you want to?
I just feel like staying in jail and trying to find a retribution in jail, that just sounds kind of crazy, just trying to find yourself in jail, finding peace and freedom. I believe
and
freedom.
Sorry. And I feel like some of these criminals, they're in jail for a reason, and many of them might not even care what they did. They won't even think about it again and won't feel any remorse.
Yeah, because once you've like taken another human life, you've kind of like gone past that moral like standpoint of like, I did something horrible, I think. I mean, in some cases, like people might have just been under emotional stress, or they might have been going through a hard time in their life and that led them to do it, but like these criminals aren't just like...
I think my point was missed. And it's that I feel that it's almost, there's, when you commit a crime, you think, oh, I'll just be killed. Like there is no teaching lesson of, there's gonna be like something bad, like we're not gonna let you live this down. Your deed is gonna be punished. And I don't think that the death penalty does that. I don't.
And to follow up on that, there are like a lot of gang members or like mobsters would rather die by like their own hands, by like suicide or something, than go to jail. Is that the point you're trying to make, kind of? Okay.
Doesn't that just further our point?
No.
How do you think it furthers your point?
Well, you said they wouldn't want to spend the rest of their life in jail.
Yeah,
They'd
so
rather kill themselves.
That's why it's the worst
Then
punishment to send them to jail.
Because
and
you're
then have
basically
them
rewarding
learn
them.
their lesson and then
So
send
isn't
them
that
back
more
out.
cruel and unusual than
Yeah.
what we're saying?
No, because
It
you
sounds like
are
you guys are just furthering our point right now.
there's nothing. There is no. They don't want to spend time in jail, so they're not. They would not. They don't want to commit. They don't want to be punished like that.
What about
so
spending
they
the
wouldn't.
rest of your life in jail? Spending that 16 and a half years is the average time to be sentenced to death. Well, it's spending the rest of your life in jail. That's just my thought.
Your point being that if they want to die, then you're almost
Yeah.
rewarding them
Yeah.
as opposed to giving
Yeah.
them.
That's mental.
So you're making it seem like ours
That's
isn't even a
not-
punishment? That's kind of what you're trying to say. It's not really punishment to some criminals. It's almost a reward so that they can like...
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's not.
Well, if
I just... Yeah.
I don't know if it wouldn't be even case of going to jail if they're literally committing a crime because they want to die. That doesn't sound like it'd be going to like the mental side, not straight to jail. Mental hospital, mental something. You wouldn't be sentenced to jail if you're literally going to committing a crime with the idea of I want to die. That's a mental issue, not.
Another big
Jail.
point about the death penalty is the effect it has on poor people, the racial bias that seems to be like these statistics we see. Now, many people would say the poor have a disadvantage for attorneys. Is there something you guys like to say on that point?
Well, attorneys, in cases involving the death penalty, attorneys spend a lot more time focusing on that. If we got rid of the death penalty, then they could evenly distribute their time for all their cases. And also, on the race issue, a study in California found that those who killed whites were three times more likely to be sentenced to death than those who killed blacks, and over 4 times more likely than those who killed Latinos. And that's just, it's not fair to have different people, based on the color of their skin, have a different chance of being executed for the crimes that they allegedly committed.
Well, I think you also have to think about that on like a cultural standpoint. Like the people who commit, like race might have had a factor in bias of the jury and things like that. But, you don't have the specific, this case, someone killed, this person, and because they were Latino, they got sentenced to death. That
What
sort of
about
thing.
the
I don't think
man
it's
earlier,
like,
Carlos de Luna.
well, yeah, that's one specific case, but I don't think you can like
Well,
say
there are
that
others,
every
Troy
case
Davis,
in the
Greg
entire
Graham,
country
Cameron Todd
is.
Willingham.
Uh,
How many
well-
do I have to say before you realize that one is too many?
But I think that you can't just undermine the entire rule of the death penalty because you have a few cases where it's gone wrong, and like Cole said, it's not a fault in the death penalty, it's a fault in the justice system. So we should get reform there rather than in reforming the law that's in place.
And the justice system is a good point. We have a very world-renowned justice system. But in any justice system, there are mistakes. Do you guys think that the death penalty is worth the possible mistakes? A lot of people get off, and I would say that's probably a pro for the justice system, being that people who were not, there weren't enough evidence they got off death row. Do you guys think that even though there are these mistakes, it's for a larger goal, we need to, focus on a bigger issue here?
Oh,
Go ahead.
I think the larger goal is just finding justice, and the purpose of our legal justice system is to protect the rights of life, our freedom, and the safety of our victims. And I believe just getting these murderers, people that commit treason, large-scale drug trafficking off the streets, and this, I don't really want to pay for them in jail. Pay for their lives, pay for the rest of their life in jail.
Well, before you execute somebody, you have to keep them on death row for, like you said, about 16 years. And that's a lot more money that you're paying for those people than you are for people that are spending life in prison.
Do you think there's a different way to play of it? If I'm a taxpayer, I'm going to pay for their legal defense, maybe. That's a hallmark of American society. Do you think there's a difference between paying for someone's legal defense as opposed to paying for a potential murderer's 3 square meals a day?
I don't think that it would matter that much to the average taxpayer because that's just money that they're losing. They don't really care. But I don't think that it would be just to have different amounts going to greater amounts going to people on death row because they're going to be executed, which is just cruel inherently. And it doesn't seem fair to the taxpayer.
As we wrap up our discussion, would you guys like to make some final comments over here? Then we'll go with you guys.
The death penalty does not deter crime. It is a waste of money, discriminates based on race. Loads of people on death row have been found innocent. Some innocent people have been executed, and it's just inhumane.
You guys?
Well, I think just to wrap that up, a lot of those are faults in the justice system, not in the death penalty. So, reform in our justice system and how we carry out the laws could help those things from being changed rather than just abolishing the death penalty altogether.
Yeah, and each execution that is carried out results in 5 fewer homicides, and overturning it means 5 more homicides.
Where's that statistic come from?
Washington Post.
Washington Post?
Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, so we're going to have to hold our discussion there. Again, we invite you, our viewers, to email us your thoughts and suggestions about today's topic so we continue our discussion in our government class. We thank Nauset High School's television production class and Lower Cape TV for making this valuable experience possible for all of us. That concludes another segment of We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP U.S. Government and Politics program. I'm Jacob Hirschberger. Thank you for watching.